when a man in a soaked leather jacket and muddy motorcycle boots pushed through the door of a tiny soul food restaurant on a cold Wednesday night in Nashville, Tennessee. Nobody inside thought much of it. Nobody looked up. Nobody recognized him. He was just another stranger coming in out of the rain. What happened over the next 2 hours? What he heard, what he said, what he did without telling a single person, would take months to fully unfold. And the part that will stay with you longest isn't the part you're expecting. Stay with us, because it doesn't come until the very end. The sign above the door had a crack running through the second letter A. It had been cracked since a hailstorm in August. Dorothy Calloway. Everybody called her Dot, kept meaning to replace it. But when you're 4 months behind on rent and your daughter's medical bills are stacking up like unpaid prayers, and your walk-in cooler sounds like a truck engine trying to start in January, a cracked letter on a sign is honestly not your most pressing problem. So it still read, Mama Dot's Table. And the people of East Nashville didn't need it to be perfect. They had been coming since 2012, since Dot and her husband Leonard first unlocked the door of the narrow little building. On Fatherland Street, 11 tables, second-hand chairs that didn't quite match, but had been painted the same shade of deep green so they looked intentional. A chalkboard menu in Leonard's careful handwriting, and a kitchen that smelled so good it reached the sidewalk and grabbed people by the collar before they even decided they were hungry. They came for the fried catfish. They came for the black-eyed peas, slow-cooked with fatback, since 4 in the morning. Leonard used to say they tasted like a Sunday sermon, felt something you couldn't quite explain to someone who hadn't experienced it, but something that settled in you after the fact and changed the quality of the day. They came for the buttermilk biscuits Dot made from a recipe her mother had handwritten on the back of a church bulletin in 1979. The ink had faded at the edges. Every word was still readable where it mattered. They came for the sweet potato pie that regular customers drove across 2 zip codes for on holidays and sometimes on ordinary Tuesdays just because the week had been hard and they needed something real. They came because Mama Dot's Table was the kind of place that remembered you. The kind of place where the food carried history inside it. Where you could feel, in a single bite of something made with full attention, that the person who cooked it had cared about the outcome. Not for the review, not for the photograph, for you. 10 years of that. 10 years of 5 a.m. mornings and sore feet and inventory mistakes and vendor disputes, and the particular, unending problem of staying open in a neighborhood that was changing fast around you, while you were trying to hold on to the thing that made the neighborhood worth changing into. But it was Wednesday, November 7th, 2022, and Dorothy Calloway, 56 years old, was standing at her prep counter at 7:12 in the evening doing arithmetic in her head that did not add up, no matter how many different directions she ran it. $4,500. That was what she owed Preston Galt by the end of the month. 4 months of rent at $1,125 a month. Sitting unpaid, accumulating the way debt accumulates. Quietly, steadily, without the decency to announce itself until it's already become a problem you can't ignore. Preston Galt owned the building on Fatherland Street. He owned 11 other buildings in East Nashville, 2 in Germantown, and a strip of commercial properties along Nolensville Pike that he had been quietly assembling for nearly a decade. He was 51 years old, silver-haired in the way that reads as distinguished rather than old, and wore the kind of suits that told you exactly how much he wanted you to know he could afford them. He drove a black Mercedes and ate lunch at the kind of restaurants that required reservation and took themselves very seriously. He'd had been patient with Dot through the first 2 months of arrears. By the third month, his calls had started carrying a different tone. By the fourth, he had stopped pretending the patience was genuine. She had $4,500 and 23 days to find it. She had $840 in her business account. The dining room through the pass-through window held 6 occupied tables on this particular Wednesday night. A couple she recognized from the neighborhood, the Parkers, who had been coming since the first year. They always ordered the same things and always held hands across the table while they waited for the food, which Dot had always found quietly extraordinary. 2 men in Carhartt work jackets and heavy boots, who had clearly come straight off a job site and were eating with the focused, grateful intensity of people who had not stopped moving since before the sun came up. An older woman named Agnes who came every Wednesday, without exception, and always ordered the catfish and always asked Dot how she was doing, and this was the thing that made Agnes different from most people who asked that question, always actually waited for the answer. A man named Gerald at the corner table, who taught American history at the high school 3 blocks away, and who came on Tuesday and Wednesday evenings, and always ordered the pork and the black-eyed peas, and always tipped exactly 20%, and always left looking slightly more settled than when he arrived, as though eating good food in a quiet room had given him back some resource the day had spent. And Dot herself, behind the counter, doing the math. She looked at the folder on the prep counter behind her. Suzanne's medical folder. Suzanne was 28 years old. She had been in a car accident on Thompson Lane 14 months ago. A driver ran a red light at 50 miles per hour and hit Suzanne's car on the driver's side without slowing. The impact had damaged 2 vertebrae in her lower lumbar spine. The first surgery at Vanderbilt stabilized things. The recovery was supposed to be difficult but clear. 6 months of physical therapy, then a gradual return to full function. That was what the first surgeon had told them. What actually happened was that the pain had not resolved. 3 months after surgery, it was still there. 6 months after, it was still there. A second opinion, which Dot had taken out a personal loan to afford because the insurance denied the referral twice before approving it on the 3rd attempt, had revealed a complication from the original procedure. A small fragment of bone material in a position that was causing ongoing nerve pressure. Addressable, but requiring a second surgery. A specific kind of second surgery, performed by a specific kind of specialist. Dr. Franklin Pierce at Vanderbilt University Medical Center was the man they needed. His office had called last Tuesday. The procedure Suzanne needed, a minimally invasive spinal decompression, was fully scheduled. The insurance would cover 70%. The remaining 30% came to $6,800. Out of pocket, due 30 days before the procedure date. The procedure was scheduled for January 9th. 30% was due December 9th. Dot looked at the folder, looked at the prep counter, looked at the dining room through the window where Agnes was folding her napkin into a small, neat square the way she always did before the food arrived. It was Agnes's way of getting ready, of saying to the table, something worth paying full attention to is about to happen. Dot had always loved that about Agnes. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she fixed her apron, straightened the small gold cross pendant at her collarbone. Leonard had given it to her on their 22nd anniversary, 2 years before he died, and went back to work. That was when the door opened. The bell above it made its familiar sound, and a man came in out of the rain. The first thing Dot noticed was the jacket. Heavy black leather, rain dark across both shoulders and halfway down the back, the way a jacket gets when someone has been riding in weather for a while, and not entirely winning. He pushed the door shut behind him with one hand and stood in the entryway for a moment, water dripping from his sleeves onto the mat Leonard had put down in 2014 because Dot kept slipping on rainy days, and he had decided this was not acceptable. He pulled back the hood of the gray sweatshirt he wore under the jacket, ran a hand through dark hair that was damp at the edges and threaded through with natural silver. He had 3 or 4 days of stubble and the kind of face that had lived some amount of weather itself. Not weathered in the harsh sense, but in the way a face gets when a person has spent real time outdoors and thinking about things that required the outdoors to think about properly. He looked around the restaurant, not the way people look around a room when they are deciding if it is good enough for them. Not that appraisal look, not the look that moves across surfaces of a place looking for what it is worth. More the way a person looks when they have been out in the cold for a while and have stepped into somewhere warm and lit, and they need a moment to let the contrast register, to let the warmth come into their shoulders, to let their eyes rest on something that isn't moving. His eyes found the chalkboard menu on the far wall. He read it, slowly, without hurrying. His face did something quiet and private. The way a face moves when words on a board remind you of a room you haven't been in for a long time. When a list of dishes calls up a person, a table, a particular afternoon, without asking your permission first. Then his eyes found Dot behind the counter. "Evening," he said. His voice was low. "Even. Not performing anything. Are you still serving?" "Yes, sir." Dot found herself straightening slightly without deciding to. "Kitchen's open till 9. He looked at the chalkboard again. Took his time with it. "The catfish," he said. "Is it fresh?" "Came in this morning." Something in his face settled. "I'll have that," he said, "with the black-eyed peas and a biscuit. And coffee if you have it." "Black." "I have it," she said. He chose the table in the far corner, the one with its back to the wall and a clear view of both the door and most of the room. He set his duffel bag on the floor beside the chair and sat down. No phone on the table, no laptop, no earbuds, nothing between him and the room. Just a man in a wet leather jacket who had pulled his chair slightly sideways so his long legs had room, and who was looking out the rain-streaked window at Fatherland Street with the particular stillness of someone who has learned how to be quiet inside their own head and finds it, mostly, a reasonable place to be. Gerald looked up from his corner table, looked at the man, looked back at his food, then looked up again, then set his fork down very carefully and reached for his water glass. Not because he was thirsty, because he needed something to do with his hands while he processed what his eyes were telling him. Agnes had both hands wrapped around her sweet tea glass. Her eyes were very still, the specific stillness of a person who is almost certain about something and is not quite ready to say it out loud. The two men from the job site had gone quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet, the quiet of people who have noticed something and are watching without being obvious about it, which they were not entirely succeeding at. Dorothy Calloway went into the kitchen and plated his order herself. She wasn't thinking about it consciously. It just happened. Her hands found the right piece of catfish, the one with the crust gone exactly the right color, the color that only comes after years of cooking the same thing until you can read it at a glance. Black-eyed peas scooped from the deepest part of the pot where the liquid had reduced, and the peas had become most fully themselves. The biscuit she split and buttered before she put it on the plate, because that was how her mother had done it, and her grandmother before that, and she had never once considered not doing it that way. She carried the plate to the corner table herself. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, simple, unhurried, pointed directly at her. Not the kind of thanks that is aimed slightly past you toward the general concept of gratitude. The kind that lands where it is directed. She went back to the counter. She watched him through the small oval mirror near the coffee station. Leonard had hung it. Said every restaurant needs eyes in the back of its head. She had moved it twice over 10 years and always moved it back to the same spot because he had been right. She watched the man in the corner take his first bite of catfish. He went still. Not the stillness of someone eating. The other kind. The kind that happens when food reaches something inside you that you weren't expecting to find there. When a flavor carries memory the way nothing else does. When a bite of something puts you somewhere you haven't been in a long time, and your whole body needs a second to remember how to be there. He sat with that for a moment, eyes not quite focused on anything in the room. Then he took another bite, slower, more deliberate, like he was paying the full attention the thing deserved. He worked through the black-eyed peas. He tried the coffee and set it down and sat with the taste, the way you sit, with something you were not prepared to be this good. Then he tore the biscuit with both hands. Not with a fork, not with a knife, just his hands pulling it apart. And that single small gesture told Dot more about who this man actually was underneath everything than anything that had come before it. People who tear biscuits with their hands learned to eat from someone who sat across the table from them and showed them that food was worth slowing down for, that a meal was not a task to be completed, that the table was a place where the world outside could wait. Agnes had stopped pretending she wasn't watching. Gerald had set down his papers entirely. The two men from the job site had pushed their plates aside in the way people push plates aside when something more interesting than eating is happening. But the man in the corner was just eating. The way genuinely hungry people eat when the food is exactly right, with full attention, without self-consciousness, nothing left on the plate. He finished everything, every single thing. He sat quietly after, both hands around his coffee cup, looking at the rain on the window with that same unhurried stillness, not waiting for anything, not impatient, just present in the specific unperformed way that most people have to work very hard at and certain people seem to simply be. Dot was thinking about going over to offer the sweet potato pie. That was when her phone rang. She stepped into the back, through the kitchen pass-through. 10 feet from where he sat, separated by a half wall and the ambient sound of the kitchen equipment. Preston gulped. She pressed the phone to her ear and turned toward the wall. "Dot," he said. That was all he said for a full second, just her name. But the way he said it carried the full weight of what was coming, the way a dark sky carries a storm before the first drop falls. She could hear the reluctance in it, and underneath the reluctance, something else. Something that was not reluctance at all, but had learned to wear reluctance clothes. "I'll be honest with you because I think you deserve that," he said. He was not waiting for her to respond. He had not called to have a conversation. He had called to deliver something. "I've got a developer looking hard at this building. He's serious. He has been serious for a while, and I've given him a preliminary yes, pending some things on my end getting resolved." Dot turned closer to the wall. She kept her voice level. Leonard had taught her this. In difficult calls, in difficult rooms, your voice stays where you need it. Whatever is moving in your chest belongs to you. You don't give it to the person on the other end. They haven't earned it, and they won't handle it carefully. "Preston," she said, "I told you about the church luncheon on the 14th. 62 people confirmed, and the Henderson family has the private room on the 21st for a 40th anniversary dinner. Those are real numbers, real money." "I hear you," he said. His voice was pleasant, professionally pleasant. The way certain voices are when they have decided on an outcome and are simply completing the required form before arriving at it. "But, Dot, 4 months, $4,500. I've been carrying that for 4 months. I have bills of my own. I have obligations. I can't keep pushing this back like it doesn't exist. I need until December 1st, she said, steady, exact. That is 3.5 weeks. I can have most of what I owe by then. Maybe all of it. What does most mean in real numbers? Most means most. It means more than half and less than all, and I am telling you honestly where I stand." A pause, longer than necessary. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped slightly. Not lower out of consideration. Lower the way a voice drops when it is about to say something it has prepared in advance. "There's something I should be transparent with you about," he said. "The developer. He's not looking at this building in isolation. He's assembling a block of properties for a boutique hotel development. Your building and the 2 immediately adjacent. He already has agreements on those 2. Yours is the last piece." Dot closed her eyes. 11 tables. The biscuit recipe on the back of a church bulletin. The smell of smoked meat that had worked itself so deep into the walls over 10 years that the whole building carried it now. Leonard's handwriting still penciled on the inside of the supply closet door where he had marked measurements for the shelving summer they renovated and written the date beside them in his precise, practical hand. "A boutique hotel. 3 weeks, Preston," she said. "Please." The silence stretched long enough that she genuinely thought the call had dropped. "November 30th, he said finally. "That is my absolute limit, Dot. You have 4,500 in my hand by Thanksgiving weekend, and we go forward like this conversation didn't happen. You don't, and I have to give this developer his answer. I'm sorry. I truly am. That is the best I can honestly do." She said thank you. She meant it as little as she had ever meant those 2 words. She hung up. She stood with her back flat against the kitchen wall, her hand pressed against her sternum, her eyes at the ceiling. The math ran itself in her head with the mechanical efficiency it always had. 30 days away. 840 in the account. The church luncheon might bring in 900 clear if everything went right, and nothing unexpected ate into the margins. The anniversary dinner may be 700 if they filled every seat. That was $2,440. She was still $2,060 short of the rent, and that said nothing about the December 9th payment to Vanderbilt for Suzanne. She fixed her face, put the phone back into her apron pocket, walked back through the pass-through into the front of the restaurant. The man in the corner was looking directly at her, not casually, not the drift of eyes toward movement, the way a person looks when they have heard something true and painful and sitting with it, not rushing, not performing their reaction, deciding quietly and without show what they are going to do. Dot felt the heat come into her face. "I apologize," she said, straightening her apron with both hands. "Can I get you anything else? Dessert? I have sweet potato pie tonight. Made it fresh this morning." He was quiet for a moment. "Did you make everything that came out on that plate yourself?" he asked. "Everything," she said. He nodded, looking at the empty plate in front of him, as though some quality of it still held his attention even after the food itself was gone. Then he looked back up at her. His eyes were the kind of eyes that had clearly seen a lot of the world, not hardened by it. Something closer to the opposite, as though the seeing had made something in him more open rather than less. "Would you sit down for a minute?" he asked. She wasn't sure why she did it. She never sat with customers. It was not her policy and had never been. It was that unwritten rule that had worked its way so deep into how she ran the restaurant that it stopped feeling like a rule and started feeling simply like the right shape of things. But something in the way he asked, not demanding, not assuming, just asking, as though sitting down were genuinely optional, and he wanted her to know that. The restaurant had quieted around them by then. Agnes had paid and gone, pressing both of Dot's hands at the counter, the way she always did when she left, with the particular kind of hold that says more than whatever the person says out loud. The job site men had settled their check and headed back into the rain. The Parkers were on their way out, the woman pausing at the door to wave at Dot the way neighbors wave. Only Gerald remained at his corner table, and Gerald was, Dot had always known, the kind of man who understood without being told when something private was taking shape nearby. He had pulled his papers close and would not look up until the room itself changed. Dot sat down across from the man in the wet leather jacket. "How long have you had this place?" he asked. "Since 2012, she said. 10 years this past March." He looked around the restaurant, the way he'd looked at the menu, slowly, actually seeing it. At the chalkboard with Leonard's careful handwriting that Dot had never erased it and rewritten in her own hand. Though she had added to it and changed the seasonal items, because she couldn't make herself remove the letters that Leonard had put there. At the framed photograph near the register, Dot and Leonard on opening day in 2012, both of them grinning in front of the sign that still had its intact, grinning, the kind of grin that comes from starting something you have believed in for a long time, and finally, after all the planning and the doubt and the paperwork and the setbacks, getting to begin. At the small wooden shelf near the door, where 3 African violets sat in clay pots, 2 blooming purple, one taking its own sweet time. He took all of it in the way certain people take in a room, not looking at things, seeing them. Then he said, "You're in trouble. Not a question. Not unkind. Just named. The way a good doctor names something. The clean, direct way that says, we can stop pretending this isn't in the room and start actually talking about it." Dot looked at her hands on the table. "I didn't mean for you to hear that call," she said. "I know." A pause. "This room is small. The wall between the kitchen and the dining room doesn't go all the way up." She said nothing. He waited. Not impatiently, just waited the way certain people can wait, without filling the space, without making the silence feel like pressure. "How much?" he said. She shook her head. "That's not something you need to concern yourself with. I appreciate you coming in tonight. The food, ma'am." His voice was gentle, but it had a quality underneath it, like good hardwood, something you cannot compress no matter what you stack on it. "How much do you need to stay open?" Outside, the rain had thinned to a fine mist. A car moved slowly along Fatherland Street. Its headlights laid a long, pale line across the wet road, and then let it go. Dot looked at him. $4,500, she said. By November 30th. He did not reach for his phone. He did not flinch. He did not do anything dramatic with his face. He just sat with the number. The way you sit with something that deserves a real moment before you do anything else with it. As though a number that represents 4 months of someone's work and life and 10 years of a shared dream is entitled to at least a moment of actual consideration before you respond. "Tell me about your daughter," he said. Dot's head came up. "How did you know?" she asked. "You mentioned a specialist," he said quietly. "On the call. I didn't mean to hear it. But in a room this size, he left the rest there." So she told him. She told him about the accident on Thompson Lane, the driver who ran the light, the 2 damaged vertebrae, the first surgery that stabilized things but didn't resolve what it was to resolve, the second opinion that cost her a personal loan, the complication. Dr. Pierce, the procedure scheduled for January 9th. The $6,800 due on December 9th. She told him about Suzanne, not just the medical part, the other parts. About Suzanne before the accident. 1 semester from finishing a degree in physical therapy. 28 years old and completely clear about what she was going to do with her life and how she was going to do it and why it mattered, with the kind of certainty that most people spend their whole lives searching for. About Suzanne after. Still all of those things, Dot said this plainly, all of those qualities still entirely present, because pain takes a great deal from a person, but it does not take who they fundamentally are unless they let it. And Suzanne was not the kind of person who let things, but in pain. Real, chronic, daily pain that had reorganized the basic architecture of her life. That had put the degree on hold. That had made things as simple as sitting and walking from one room to another into negotiations. And Suzanne had not said much about any of that to Dot. Because Suzanne, Dot said with the particular kind of love that holds something close, because it is so recognizable, was exactly like Leonard. She would carry what she was carrying, and she would not make it someone else's weight. She would make her face say fine, when fine was not the complete picture. She told him about Rochelle, Suzanne's older sister, who had sent money twice from Oregon, and wanted to send more but had her own family and her own mortgage and her own calculations that she was running. She told him more than she had intended to tell anyone who was not blood. It came out the way things come out when you have been holding them alone for long enough that the holding itself has become a second job. When someone finally sits across from you and looks at you, not at the business owner or the widow or the woman who is behind on rent, but at the actual purse stops being possible. The holding simply stops being possible. He listened. He did not check his phone once. He did not lean back or cross his arms or do any of the small physical adjustments that signal a person is waiting for their turn. He just listened, the full weight of his attention directed at her. Without performance, without hurry. When she finished, the restaurant was so quiet she could hear the rain on the roof, the walk-in cooler cycling on in the kitchen, with its familiar grinding complaint. Gerald turning a single page in his papers. "Can I see a picture of her?" he asked. Dot took her phone from her apron pocket. She found the photograph she always found when she wanted the one that was most Suzanne. Taken at Christmas, in the house on Boscobel Street. See Suzanne in a green sweater, one hand on her hip, head tilted at approximately 2 years old. The angle that meant she was about to say something exact, and probably she was about funny and entirely right, and CD somewhat funnity. Fucd, CUCD, funnies. Dot turned the screen toward him. He looked at the photograph. Longer than people typically look at photographs of someone they don't know. The way you look when you are seeing a person, not processing an image, seeing someone. Then he handed the phone back. Both hands. Carefully. The way you return something to someone and you want them to know by how you return it that you understand what it is. He said something then. Something Dot would hold close for a long time afterward. Not share in interviews. Not repeat in full to anyone for many months. What she would eventually say when she did finally speak about it was this. It had nothing to do with money, and nothing to do with advice. It was something quieter than either of those things. Something that went past the restaurant and the bills and the folder on the prep counter, and landed directly in the part of her that had been carrying the full weight of everything since March of 2020, when Leonard died, and that had not once, in that time, been spoken to directly. He asked for a piece of paper. She gave him the back of an order ticket. The plain white kind she kept on a small stack near the register, printed with the restaurant name at the top. He wrote on it with the pen she handed him, pressing carefully, like the words were going to need to be readable in the morning. He folded the paper twice. He held it out to her across the table. "Don't open that tonight," he said. "Go home, sleep, open it in the morning." Then he stood up, all of him. He walked to the register and paid for his meal. He put $60 on the corner table, folded into a neat square, and tucked under the edge of his coffee cup so the cup held it. He shook her hand with both of his. Not the one-pump business-like kind handshake, but the other kind. The kind that certain people offer when a handshake is meant to carry something more than two hands briefly meeting. Then he pulled the sweatshirt hood up over his damp hair, zipped the leather jacket to the collar, and walked out through the door he had come in through 2 hours ago, into the mist. His motorcycle was parked at the curb. She could hear the engine turn over once and then settle. And then the sound of it, moving down Fatherland Street, getting smaller, until the night absorbed it entirely. Dot stood in the middle of the quiet dining room. Gerald had his eyes down on his papers and would not look up. She looked at the folded order ticket in her hand. She almost opened it right there. Her thumb was at the first fold. She stopped. She wasn't sure exactly why. Something in the way he had said it. Sleep first. It had the quality of something you're supposed to actually obey. not merely consider. She locked up, covered the pies, wiped the tables, drove home to the house on Boscobel Street, through streets that were dark and rain-wet and quiet. Called Suzanne, just to hear her voice. Didn't say much. Suzanne asked if she was okay. Dot said yes. Suzanne said she sounded like she'd had a day. Dot said she'd had a day. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, which was the whole point. She made soup at the kitchen counter, ate it standing because sitting down felt like more than she was capable of. Got into the bed she had shared with Leonard for 24 years, put the folded order ticket carefully on his side of the mattress. She did not sleep easily, but she slept. At 4:51 in the morning, she reached for the paper, unfolded it. Two things were written in large, steady handwriting, a phone number she did not recognize, and 8 words beneath it. Call this at 9 a.m. She is expecting you, nothing else. No last name beside the number, no explanation of who she was, no indication of what had already been said between this man and this unknown woman, or what the calling would begin. Dot set the paper down on Leonard's pillow. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table in the dark as the Georgia dawn, no, the Tennessee dawn, moved through its stages. Black, a dark charcoal gray, then the deep blue that comes before color commits to the sky, then the pale, non-committal light that happens in the last few minutes before morning finally arrives and decides to stay. At 8:58 she picked up her phone. At exactly 9 o'clock, she dialed. It rang once. A woman answered. Her voice had the particular, steady warmth of someone who has spent years delivering serious news to frightened people and has come to understand that the most important thing she can give them in those moments, before anything else, is a voice that tells them they do not need to be afraid of the person they're talking to. Miss Calloway? Dot gripped the phone hard. Yes. My name is Dr. Andrea Marsh, the woman said. I'm a spinal specialist practicing here in Nashville. I completed a fellowship at Mayo Clinic, and I've been here 11 years. A mutual acquaintance called me last night about your daughter Suzanne's situation. A brief pause, measured and gentle. I've reviewed the summary he sent over of her case history. I'd like to see her myself, a full evaluation. No cost to your family for the consultation or for any follow-up care I provide directly. Can you bring her in next week? Dorothy Calloway put her hand over her mouth. She sat at her kitchen table in the early morning light of her small house on Boscobel Street, with Leonard's empty chair across from her and her coffee going cold beside her. And she cried. Not the controlled kind. Not the she trained to since March of 2020, jaw tight, eyes at the ceiling, tears going sideways so no one could read them on her face. This was the other kind, the kind that surfaces from somewhere so deep it surprises you. Like water finding a crack in a floor you believed was solid. The kind that comes when something has been held under pressure for so long, that the moment the pressure releases, everything stored there comes up at once. She cried for a long time at that kitchen table. Then she wiped her face with a dish towel, blew her nose, sat for a moment with both hands flat on the table. Then she called Suzanne. Suzanne cried too. Now, before we go any further, there is something this story has not yet told you. Something about Preston Gould, about what he had actually been doing. This is the part most people leave out when they tell this story, and it is the part that matters most to understand. Because Preston Gould was not merely a landlord who needed his rent money and was running out of patience. He had been engineering this situation, deliberately, systematically. For 8 months, the developer who wanted the block of properties on Fatherland Street was a man named Douglas Avery. He ran a private real estate development firm called Avery Capital Partners out of Brentwood, Tennessee, with a portfolio focused on boutique hospitality projects in gentrifying urban neighborhoods. He had approached Preston in March of that year with a proposal to acquire 3 adjacent buildings on Fatherland for a 120-room boutique hotel development. He had agreements on 2 of those buildings by April. Dot's building was the only piece he was missing. What Preston had not told Dot, had never told her, had never intended to tell her, was this: he had received a formal purchase offer from Avery in May. A full offer above fair market value with a closing timeline attached. Enough money that Preston could have terminated Dot's lease with proper legal notice, and whatever contractual compensation the lease required, handled the whole thing above board, and walked away with a significant profit and a clean conscience. He had chosen not to do it that way, because Douglas Avery's purchase offer included a premium clause, a 10% bonus on the final sale price, $68,000, if Preston could deliver a vacant building by December 1st. No active tenants, no ongoing lease, no legal entanglements, clean and empty and ready for demolition permits. $68,000 for delivering an empty building. So Preston had made a calculation. If Dot was 4 months behind on rent, her lease could be terminated for cause. No compensation required, no messy legal negotiation, no press release about a long-time local business being displaced by development, just a landlord enforcing a lease agreement. Standard practice, nothing for anyone to write about. He had let the arrears accumulate without calling her the way a genuinely concerned landlord calls. He had not offered a payment arrangement. He had not offered a temporary reduction. He had let the debt grow while the deadline approached, and he had made the calls he did make, just firm enough to keep her off balance, without being firm enough to prompt her to consult an attorney. And there was one more thing. In July, a health inspector had arrived at Mama Dot's table for a surprise visit. The visit had been prompted by a formal complaint filed with the Metro Nashville Health Department. When Dot's attorney later requested the full complaint file, the address attached to the filing resolved to a P.O. box registered to a company called Thornfield Consulting LLC. Thornfield Consulting LLC had no website, no other public presence, no business filings beyond the registration itself. The inspection had found nothing substantive. Dot's kitchen was clean. Her food storage was properly maintained. Her handling procedures were correct. The inspector had noted one minor item about the placement of a secondary fire suppression label, a labeling issue, not a safety issue, and closed the report. But 2 event bookings had been lost. A corporate lunch for 40 people from a financial services firm downtown, and a rehearsal dinner that a family had been planning to hold in Dot's back room for 3 months. Both had withdrawn within a week of the inspection, citing concerns about the restaurant's compliance history that the inspection itself, properly read, did not actually support. $8,000 in revenue. Gone. Preston Galt had not manufactured Dot's financial trouble, but he had ensured it could not heal on its own. He had put his thumb on the wound, quietly, deniably, with the particular confidence of a man who has never had to answer for the gap between what he does and how he presents it. Dot did not know any of this on the night Keanu Reeves walked through her door. She would not know it for another 3 weeks. But the story was already in motion. Here is what happened in the days that followed. On Friday, November 10th, a certified bank check arrived at Mama Dot's table by courier. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address and no identifying information on the outside. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of plain paper with 3 words printed on it. For the catfish. The check was made out to Preston Galt for exactly $4,500. Dot read the note twice. Then she sat down on the stool behind the prep counter and looked at the check for a long time. Then she drove to Preston Galt's office on Music Row and walked past his assistant and placed the envelope on his desk and watched his face move through several different configurations while he processed what he was looking at. He said her name, then corrected it. He said Ms. Calloway. He asked where this had come from. I had a very good customer come in Wednesday night, she said. She walked out without looking back. On Monday, November 13th, Dot drove Suzanne to see Dr. Andrea Marsh at her clinic on Charlotte Avenue. Dr. Marsh was 44 years old. She had the kind of manner that communicates within the first 2 minutes of meeting someone that she is operating in the medicine as relationship model rather than the medicine as transaction model. She spent 90 minutes with Suzanne. She explained everything she was doing as she did it. She used words that meant what they said. She told Dot that Suzanne's case, at its current stage, was manageable, that the complication from the first surgery was real but well-defined, that she had handled complications of this specific type before, and the outcomes, with the right procedure and a careful rehabilitation protocol, were genuinely good. That she wanted to personally manage Suzanne's case from this point forward. That all costs associated with her direct care would be fully covered. Suzanne asked Dr. Marsh, with the blunt directness she'd had since childhood, what her honest assessment was of whether Suzanne would be able to complete her physical therapy degree. Dr. Marsh looked at her for a moment. Yes, she said. I believe you will complete it, and I think you will be excellent at it. Because people who have experienced serious pain don't just learn about pain management from a textbook. They understand it from the inside, and that changes how they're able to help other people. Suzanne pressed her lips together, nodded once. She held it together in the clinic. She held it together through the parking garage. She held it together until they were in the car, and Dot was pulling out onto Charlotte Avenue. Then she cried for 11 city blocks. Dot drove and did not say anything, because sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is simply drive and let them. On the evening of November 15th, a woman named Carla Briggs was having dinner at Mama Dot's table with her husband. Carla was a features reporter for the Nashville scene. She had been covering East Nashville for 6 years with the particular attentiveness of a journalist who had grown to genuinely love a neighborhood and felt perhaps a responsibility to that love. She photographed her plate, the catfish golden and perfect, the black-eyed peas, the split biscuit with butter going soft at the edges. She posted it to her personal social media page with a caption about how Mama Dot's table was one of the best and most under-known restaurants in the neighborhood, and how if you hadn't been, you were genuinely, specifically missing something. What she did not notice when she posted the photo was that in the background slightly out of focus but unmistakably present. Seated at the corner table by the window was a man in a leather jacket. Someone in the comments section noticed. Then 6 more people. Then a local entertainment blog picked up the photograph and ran a short item. By the following afternoon, it had reached several larger platforms. Keanu Reeves. Alone. No team. No arrangements. No event. Just a rainy Wednesday night and a corner table and everything on the plate. The phone at Mama Dot's table rang without stopping for 2 full days. Dot eventually put it face down on the prep counter so she could actually cook. She still answered it. She just couldn't watch it anymore. But there was something else happening simultaneously, something that nobody at Mama Dot's table knew about yet. A journalist named Paul Withers had been working on a story. Paul wrote investigative real estate pieces for the Nashville Banner. He had been watching fictitious Avery and Avery Capital Partners for several months. He had noticed a pattern in the way properties Avery acquired tended to have their tenants depart under circumstances that, looked at individually, seemed like ordinary market outcomes. Leases expired, businesses fell behind, landlord-tenant disputes resolved in landlord's favor. But across 11 acquisitions over 3 years, the pattern was harder to read as coincidence. The health department complaint, the one filed against Mama Dot's table in July, was the piece Paul had been looking for. The kind of detail that, when traced back far enough, leads you somewhere specific. He had been trying to source it for 2 months. When the story about Keanu Reeves at Mama Dot's table broke, Paul Withers did what investigative journalists do. He looked up the restaurant, looked up the building, looked up the landlord. He found Preston Galt. He found Avery Capital Partners. He found a source inside Galt's organization who confirmed the existence and the specific terms of the premium clause in the purchase agreement. He found Thornfield Consulting LLC. He found the P.O. Box. He found, through a contact at the Metro Nashville Health Department, the internal routing record that showed the July complaint had been flagged on intake as originating from an address with no prior filing history and no identifiable complainant background. Paul Withers published his story in the Nashville Banner on November 22nd. 4,000 words, 2 sources on record, 3 unnamed, documents attached. The headline read, "Developer and landlord used coordinated pressure to force out East Nashville small businesses, documents show." The story named Galt, named Avery, detailed the premium clause, documented the Thornfield filing, traced the pattern across 11 other properties over 36 months, included statements from 3 former tenants, a florist, a bookkeeper who ran a small tax preparation office, a woman who had owned a children's art studio, who described experiences that, in the context of what Paul had documented, looked like a coordinated strategy rather than a series of unrelated business decisions. Preston Galt's attorney released a statement by end of business that day. It said that Mr. Galt categorically denied any improper conduct and that the allegations were without merit. By the following morning, the Tennessee Real Estate Commission had received 14 formal complaints. By the end of the week, 4 of Galt's commercial tenants had retained legal counsel. On November 29th, Douglas Avery withdrew Avery Capital Partners from the Fatherland Street development project. His firm's statement said the project no longer aligned with their current portfolio priorities. What it did not say was that 3 institutional partners in the boutique hotel fund had withdrawn their capital commitments within 48 hours of Paul Withers's story being published, or that Avery Capital Partners General Counsel had in a written memo that the reputationally exposure associated with continued involvement in the Fatherland's projected returns was not worth the projected returns. Preston Galt lost the $68,000 premium. He lost 3 tenants who terminated their leases under the break clauses their attorneys identified. He lost a real estate license placed under formal review by the Tennessee Real Estate Commission. He lost, though this was harder to quantify, the particular kind of standing in a professional community that cannot be fully recovered once the mechanism by which it was built becomes visible. He sat in his office on Music Row on the last day of November and looked at the aerial photograph of the East Nashville properties he had been assembling. The photograph he'd had framed and hung behind his desk 3 years ago when the project began to look like it might actually come together. And in the quiet of that office, with no one else present, Preston Galt understood what he had actually been doing. He had been using people's lives as obstacles. He had looked at Dorothy Calloway, 56 years old, 10 years of work, her late husband's dream, her daughter's medical crisis, and he had seen a line item, a complication between himself and a premium payment, a problem to be managed with the minimum required personal engagement and the maximum plausible deniability. He had been doing this, he understood now, with more or less everyone, for years. The florist, the bookkeeper, the woman with the art studio, all of them people with lives that ran deeper and more fully than the simple categories of tenant and obstacle. And he had treated each of them as the latter. He had done it efficiently, professionally, with the easy confidence of a man who had never been asked to account for the gap between how he presented himself and what he actually did. And now the gap was visible to everyone, including himself. On December 3rd, Preston Galt drove to Fatherland Street. He came in at 2 in the afternoon. The lunch rush had ended. The dinner prep had not yet begun. The restaurant was quiet. Dot was in the kitchen. He told the young woman at the counter he was there to speak with Ms. Calloway. He said could wait as long as it needed to. He sat at table 4. He did not order anything. He folded his hands on the table and he waited. He waited 20 minutes. Dot came out of the kitchen. She stood in the pass-through doorway and looked at him. She did not move toward him. She did not sit. Preston Galt looked at the table in front of him, then up at her. "I came to tell you that I'm sorry," he said. The words came out without decoration. Not because they were insincere, because he was a man who had not said them in circumstances where they cost him anything, and he had not yet learned how to dress them up. They were just the words themselves, which was, perhaps, as honest as he knew how to be. "The complaint in July," he said. "I have to tell you directly. I filed it, not directly, through a third-party firm I engaged. I was trying to make your position more difficult, so that you might leave on your terms of your own decision. And I could tell myself that what happened was the result of market conditions rather than anything I had done." He stopped. "I know that's not better for having been said that way," he continued. "I know what those 2 bookings cost you. I know what that money represented in the context of what you were already carrying. And I know," his voice shifted slightly, not dramatically, just shifted, like a floor taking on more weight than it was designed for. I know what it is to watch something a person built get taken apart. He looked at her. My father owned a hardware store in Murfreesboro for 29 years. He lost it when I was 22. I was in my second year of business school. I told myself, sitting in those finance classes, that I was going to build something that couldn't be lost that way. And somewhere in building it, I stopped being able to see the difference between an asset and a person. The restaurant was very quiet around him. "I'm sorry, Miss Calloway," he said. "I am genuinely sorry for the complaint, for the pressure. For every month I let that arrears build while I waited for your situation to become untenable. That was deliberate, and it was wrong. And I am not here to ask you for anything. I'm here because you deserve to hear this from me directly." Dot looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. She did not tell him she forgave him. Some things cannot be given in an afternoon. Some things have to be rebuilt slowly in small and consistent actions over a period of time long enough to constitute evidence rather than gesture. But she said something. "My husband Leonard used to say that a man who can still admit he was wrong has something left to build with." She let that land where it landed. Then she went back to her kitchen. Preston Gould sat at table 4 for a few more minutes. Then he left money on the table for a piece of sweet potato pie he had not ordered and had not eaten. He walked out without looking back. The Tennessee Real Estate Commission issued its formal finding against Preston Gould in early December. A 60-day license suspension, a mandatory ethics review, 30 hours of professional conduct training required before reinstatement. Avery Capital Partners received a separate citation from the same commission for failure to properly disclose the conditional nature of the premium arrangement to a third party under state disclosure requirements. Paul Withers's story was picked up by 4 national publications and won a Tennessee Press Association award for investigative reporting the following spring. Preston Gould did not contest the commission's findings. 6 months later, the East Nashville Community Development Fund made a donation public. A significant donation, enough to fund 2 full years of small business emergency grants for independent food service establishments in the neighborhood. The donor's name was Preston Gould. It was not absolution. It was not a full accounting, but it was something, built honestly on the rubble of what had been broken. And certain kinds of rebuilding can only begin there. It is the first week of March 2023. A Tuesday morning, 7:10. Dorothy Calloway is in her kitchen at Mama Dot's table on Fatherland Street in East Nashville, Tennessee. The restaurant opens at 11. She has been here since 5:45 because she has always been here early. Because the biscuits need time. Because the black-eyed peas need time. Because good food, made with full attention, is not something you rush into existence. She is making the biscuits from the church bulletin recipe. The laminated copy is framed now, mounted on the wall above the flour bins, where she can see it from any position in the kitchen. Her mother's handwriting, every instruction legible, every measurement exact. The second dining room still carries the faint smell of fresh paint. They expanded in January. 6 new tables. A proper private event space in the back that can seat 22 for sit-down dinners. The expansion had been possible, in part, because of what had happened after Carla Briggs posted the photograph and the phones started ringing. It had been made possible also by something Dot has not described fully in public. Something she has held close. What he said at table 4, After she showed him the photograph of Suzanne. After he handed the phone back with both hands. After the restaurant had gone so quiet she could hear the rain and the cooler and Gerald turning one page. He had looked at her and said, "My mother raised me by herself for a long time. She worked more than she should have had to. More than one job sometimes. She never let me see the cost of it. Not once." A pause. She used to say that showing up every day, even when you have no idea how it's going to work, is itself a form of faith, even when you can't feel what you're supposed to be having faith in. He let that settle. "Then you remind me of that. And then, the part Dot has held closest through everything that followed. Through the check and the call, and Dr. Marsh and Paul Withers's story, and the expansion and all of it." He leaned forward slightly. "Quiet. No performance in it. Leonard picked right," he said. "That man knew what he was choosing when he chose you. And I think he would walk through that door and recognize this room immediately. I think it would feel exactly like him in here." Dot sets down the biscuit cutter. She touches the cross pendant at her collarbone, the one Leonard gave her on their 22nd anniversary. Outside on Fatherland Street, the March morning is doing what March mornings do in Nashville. The light is early and tentative, and the color of something that hasn't fully committed to being the day yet. The sign above the door glows in the early light, every letter present, every light working. Mama Dot's table, complete, all of it still standing. Suzanne's procedure with Dr. Marsh was performed in February. The recovery is going well. Better than projected, Dr. Marsh told them at the follow-up. She re-enrolled in her physical therapy program in January. She will finish her degree in December. She called Dot last Tuesday from campus. One of her clinical instructors had pulled her aside after a practical session, had told her that her capacity to connect with patients experiencing chronic pain, the specific, embodied, personal understanding she brought to those interactions, was something that most students did not develop until years into practice, if they developed it at all. Suzanne told Dot this in the particular flat voice she uses when something has moved her more than she is ready to perform. Dot had said, "Your father would not be the least bit surprised." Suzanne had said, "No, I don't think he would." They'd stayed on the phone for a while after that, not saying much, just there, which is sometimes all you need. A man came in out of the rain on a Wednesday night in November. He ordered catfish and black-eyed peas and a biscuit and black coffee. He ate everything on his plate. He heard a phone call he was never supposed to hear. He sat down and listened. He left 8 words on a folded piece of paper. He paid for his meal and left $60 on the table, and walked back into the mist and got on his motorcycle, and did not, in any of what followed, make any part of it about himself. And here is the thing he did not know, the thing nobody told him, the thing he probably would find unnecessary to hear. What he did on that Wednesday night is still moving. It is still moving through Suzanne every time she sits with a patient and looks at them the way someone once looked at her mother at a restaurant table on a rainy November night. It is still moving through Dorothy Calloway every morning at 7:10 when she takes the laminated church bulletin off the wall and starts the biscuits. It is still moving through the dining room that smells like 10 years and fresh paint, and Leonard's patients, a particular combination of people who have been coming back since 2012, because this is the kind of place that remembers you. It is still moving through East Nashville, through Paul Withers's story, through the Emergency Grant Fund, through the 12 businesses in the neighborhood that applied for assistance in the first cycle and received it. It is still moving, because that is what genuine kindness does. It doesn't require acknowledgement. It doesn't require credit. It just keeps moving. One moment, one open door at a time. And somewhere right now there is someone doing the math in their head that doesn't add up. Someone working before the sun comes up. Someone mopping their own floors and making the food from their family's recipe and holding everything together with hands that are tired and a belief that has been tested more times than they would have thought they could survive. This story is for them, so they know that one unexpected moment can change everything, and that the people who are watching quietly from the right corner are more often already in the room than any of us think. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter we're preparing for you.